Revolution has always been attracted to the flame. The idea of burning something to the ground, leaving nothing but a wary reminder of what once was, in hopes for something new to be born from the ashes, is one that is inherently commingled with the DNA of rebellion. The American flag has been seen as a symbol of the crimes of America as long as it has been one of its bravery. For its controversial reception over 250 years of wars, elections, and terrorism, the incineration comes as a tragic inevitability. It has been trivialized and manipulated by every political party, watered down with bumper stickers and swimming trunks, and manipulated to nostalgize the American right. It flies upside down, at half-mast, alongside the United Nations and alone on the moon, all at the same time. A symbol this vast must provoke passion in all its viewers. The passion can be in the form of hate, and that hate can be materialized through fire. Burning the flag of the country in protest is not a responsibility of the American people, but knowing the extension of your free speech and using it when it's necessary is. The right to free speech is one of the most underutilized and oversighted in American history, and if people know how to use their voice, they can enact change in ways they could only imagine. Activist Gregory Lee Johnson arrived at the 1984 Republican National Convention in Dallas with this in mind. He joined the Revolutionary Communist Youth Brigade in a demonstration against the Reagan administration and the Republican Party. He was one of the many protesters who painted on buildings, knocked over plants, and played dead in the street. When he reached City Hall, he ripped the flag off the pole and lit it with kerosene, saying, "America the red, white, and blue, we spit on you, you stand for plunder, you will go under." The protest resulted in 0 injuries, apart from one onlooker who claimed to be deeply offended by the incident. The charred remains of the flag were collected and burned in the backyard of spectator and Korean War veteran Daniel Walker. Johnson was indicted for his political violation of the Texas flag desecration statute and sentenced to a year in jail with a $1,000 fine. He appealed to 2 higher Texas courts, but neither loosened his punishment. Only after taking his case to the Supreme Court was he relieved of his sentence, with Justice Brennan calling his protest constitutionally expressive conduct, permitting him to invoke the First Amendment. His case received a wide public and professional outcry. In 1989, much to the disapproval of Johnson and the public, the House of Representatives moved to pass the Flag Protection Act, first introduced after NYC anti-Vietnam protests in 1967. The Supreme Court ultimately decided that the government cannot restrict symbolic speech in this way, and reaffirmed this decision in U.S. v. Eichmann, a similar case taking place a year after Johnson's decision. Gregory Lee Johnson was arrested most recently in 2016 for burning the American flag at the Cleveland-hosted Republican National Convention. The charges were dropped in January of the following year. Flag burning is not exclusively an American method, nor a new one. One such example of past flag desecration comes from 1907's Halter v. Nebraska. Halter was charged for using the American flag as marketing by printing it on beer bottles. The Supreme Court upheld Nebraska's initial decision that prohibited altering the flag in any way. Anti-U.S. protests resulted in many arrests during World War I and the creation of the Sedition Act, before it was later upheld. In the time of the Civil War, desecration of the flag could cost a person their life. In May of 1961, Colonel Elmer Ellsworth and his battalion tore down a Confederate flag hanging from an Alexandria hotel. The owner, James Jackson, came outside to find his flag destroyed and fired at the 24-year-old Ellsworth, killing him. Jackson, in turn, was shot by one of Ellsworth's comrades. Ellsworth became an American hero, with President Lincoln extending his condolences to the family of the young colonel who so gallantly gave his life. In America, burning the flag is currently legal. There are only 13 countries where flag burning is allowed. Japan is the most recent inclusion to the list, legalizing the protest in April of 2022. In the dissenting opinion of 1989's Supreme Court decision regarding Texas v. Johnson, Justice Stevens wrote, "The ideas of liberty and equality have been an irresistible force in motivating leaders like Patrick Henry, Susan B. Anthony, and Abraham Lincoln, school teachers like Nathan Hale and Booker T. Washington, and the Philippine scouts who fought at Bataan, and the soldiers who scaled the bluff at Omaha Beach. If these ideas are worth fighting for, and our history demonstrates that they are, It cannot be true that the flag that uniquely symbolizes their power is not itself worth of protection from unnecessary desecration. The common conservative opinion is that the American flag is a holy object. It is disconnected from the problems of America and has no business being criticized by protesters. Burning the flag of their country or their confederacy.
It's time to burn what remains of the Confederacy down. I do believe the South will rise again, but this time it'll be on our terms. I'm Gary Chambers and I'm running for the U.S. Senate.
Has been retaliated with using protests of their own. During a trip to Washington, D.C. just before the January 6th coup, Henry Theriault and his squadron of Proud Boys were seen tearing down a Black Lives Matter banner and lighting it ablaze. He was then arrested and sentenced to 5 months in jail for the burning and 22 years for seditious conspiracy at the Capitol riot. Through the course of the last year, flag burning has seemed to be reinvigorated through young protesters. Students on college campuses have resorted to this in revolt of the United States' involvement in Israel's genocide of Palestine. But it's not exclusively college students that rebel like this. When Israeli President Benjamin Netanyahu visited the U.S. Congress to give a speech on the conflict, he was met with protesters setting fire to the American flag in front of the Capitol building. The protesters in turn were dealt with by the police using pepper spray and other non-lethal tactics. Vice President and presidential candidate Kamala Harris wrote a condemnation of the protesters and their inflammatory practices. She called the acts despicable and unpatriotic, claiming that flag is a symbol of our highest ideals as a nation and represents the promise of America. It should never be desecrated in any way. Her words seem to echo Justice Stevens' dissent from nearly 40 years prior. Donald Trump's nationalism goes even further.
2 days ago, leftist radicals in Portland, Oregon, ripped down a statue of George Washington and wrapped it in an American flag and set the American flag on fire. And you know, we ought to do something, Mr. Senators. We have 2 great senators. We ought to come up with legislation that if you burn the American flag, you go to jail for 1 year. 1 year. That if somebody wants to burn the American flag and stomp on it, but just burn it, they go to jail for 1 year, okay?
Desecration of the American flag won't bring the end of the world, or the end of America, or even the end of the Republican Party, or the Israeli genocide. It doesn't swing people to the left, and it pushes the right further away. But we need to understand that sometimes protests aren't about collecting new voters or keeping our enemies close, but rather about sending a message to the ruling class of America. It is the responsibility of the people to tell politicians what they want, and if words fail, resort to the method before words, fire. Who can say how much longer we can function while our government robs us blind of our rights? While we're still here and still able to, why don't we warm our hands by the flames of revolution?